Welcome everyone to the Cup of Coffee podcast with me, your host Tom Dillon. This has been recorded live at our Tin Pot mobile studio and broadcast around the world. Today's topic is Don't Do This with Ed Fowkes. Before we start, I'd just like to say by way of a disclaimer that today's a wonderful discussion, but that nothing said here constitutes financial advice. You should always take professional advice before investing your hard-earned cash. There may be the odd unplanned swear word along the way as well. The format for today is that me and Ed will just have a chat, and then there'll be questions from the floor, but mostly from me because it's just me here. In terms of young Ed here, Ed Fowkes from TableNetwork has 30 years experience running businesses in UK property, from a domestic buy-to-let to a developer of institutional residential assets. Ed is creative, strategic and focused on growth, which sounds exhausting. Working as an advisor, Ed helps businesses to plan, systemise. Is it systemise or systematise, or can you choose? I'm going to go with systemise. That's what's written here. And scale. Um, uh, so that's what we got. Hello, Ed.
Hello,
How you doing?
how are you doing? Tom?
I'm doing very well. Thanks very much for agreeing to speak to us today. Real privilege.
Well, I'm privileged for me too. Um,
That sounded unconvincing.
I've been looking forward to it, and equally, I've been an element of trepidation, let's say, because I'm not very, I don't really jump in front of cameras all that much.
Right. Is there a reason for that? Have you got like what's it called, issues around your appearance or something? You're looking better than me. Let's start with that.
No, it's not so much that. I think actually my mum and my gran always used to tell me that I was going to be the model of the family.
Mm.
But it actually comes back to the conversation we were having earlier, really, which is I grew up with my uncle telling me, who sort of got famous by mistake and decided he really hated it. And him, as my one of my role models in life, and he was like, "You never want to be famous." And then, as I said, the first one, because obviously, actually, I'm not sure that we knew each other back then when I was running Canary Wharf Pin for Simon Zutshi. And after about 4 years, I got the first person who approached me in public and said, "You're Ed Fowkes, aren't you?" And I sort of went, "My God, I've got to stop now because I never want this to happen again." So I think, I really like walking into a room and having friends of mine know who I am. But I think that's where I'd like it to stop.
Yeah, it's funny. It's with
Beyond
the
that,
with,
just
with
not
with
that.
the cuppa thing with hosting this. It's got to that kind of nice level where in property meetings, I sometimes get people think like looking over me as if I know who that guy is, and I'm putting it together and then going, and that helps me because it means I don't have to do so much of an intro. Saves like a couple of
Yeah.
minutes on my side of things. But I don't want to be walking into a room where of like of anything else, and then being known. I quite agree with you on that one. Yeah. So, starting nowhere in particular, but getting into it. How did you get started in business in property in the first place? Why on earth are you here?
Oh, so I think business and property for two entirely different reasons. Property, when I was on my way to university, I just spent a year at art college and kind of flipped into a furniture design course. And my grandmother came to me, and I can't remember, why it was, but she came to me and she said, "I'm going to die one day. You may as well have some of my money before I go.
Wow.
So here's £10,000." And I kind of looked at her and looked at the bar and sort of went, "That's not going to last long. I better do something sensible with it." So I kind of, talked to a couple of people, including my parents. My dad was a conveyancing solicitor. My mum was running a lettings business at the time. And I
Mm.
just sort of went, "Well, I should buy a flat then." So I bought my first buy to let on my way to uni, which is really quite young for most people. And it
Yes.
was literally because the world had fallen off a cliff. It was 1993, so everything was dirt cheap.
Mm.
And the property that I bought is worth well over 10 times that I paid for it. Unfortunately, I sold it after my stint at university. So I sold it for twice what I bought it for, and I turned my £8,500 deposit into £45,000, which was a pretty good return over a kind of 4 year period. Plus, I got to live for free because I got my rent paid, my mortgage paid by my tenant. Um, and that kind of what started me off in property. In terms of running my own business, I've never been employable. I'm far too argumentative. I think I know everything about life, and I tell people a lot. And I've become a lot more humble over the years. But having been running my own business for so long, every time I've gone to an interview, I've always been able to tell that they've been looking at my CV and gone, "Why on earth would I take a risk hiring this guy?" Because we can get someone who can tell what to do and they'll do it. But here, all you do is disrupt stuff the whole time.
This guy
So
looks like
I kind of
trouble.
Yeah. Well, and I used to, of course, have dreadlocks and wear pink trousers and the pink bomb jacket and that sort of thing, and I really did look like trouble warmed up, you know. Um, so anyway, yeah. So that's the answer to how I got into it. And then I went did as I think I've kind of done everything from literally buy to let landlord, every single thing in the resi sphere until eventually I was developing for institutions. So the likes of Aviva and that sort of thing because I don't know. I like making my life difficult, maybe. And sometimes in the end, other people's as well, as you full well know about.
Sure. And then why did you get rid of the dreadlocks? Is that just is it as simple as an age thing? Like, 'cause unlike me, you've still got the ability by the looks of it to get some dreads on.
Yeah, I'm not sure I thought about growing them back again. I think it was just a unkempt and somewhat slightly dazed, to use a Bowie line. I was just one of those, I spent a lot of time smoking too much weed. I really
Mm.
didn't like soap. I still don't really like soap that much, but I do shower once a day. And back then, so I remember actually the first time I went to a hairdresser having had dreadlocks, they just looked at me and went, "You've got to be joking," and like sent me
Yeah,
packing out of the shop. So
yeah.
as a result, I've never been to the hairdresser since, and neither of my boys have ever been to a hairdresser or barber either.
Mm.
We cut all our hair in house. It's only my wife I'm not allowed to touch, because she cares about what she looks like, but the rest of us just don't. So not
Not too
enough anyway.
not too fussed, yeah.
So when I get back to, I think the wax in the hair was the thing that made me eventually go. It's probably the girlfriend I had before my wife who said it's a bit stinky. Can we get rid of it, please?
Yeah, why are you using candle wax? There's special products for this.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
okay, fair enough. Property stuff. So, were you brought up in London? Is that
I
where you
was,
started?
yes,
And
yes.
was your buy to let in London, or was that somewhere else cheaper?
No, so that's always been in London.
Okay, London as well.
So yeah, no, so I'm born and bred in Hackney.
Yeah.
So I'm proper EastEnders. My brother is actually an official Cockney, although I'm not. And I think, on the one side, it was kind of more luck than judgment. I was probably
Mm,
just lazy, didn't want to travel and blah, blah, blah. And then because I'd made money on the first property and and I just kind of did it bit by bit. So I was basically doing flips,
mm,
but with the at some point in time, and it was after about I guess 5 years of doing it after I left university. My mother decided to kind of join forces and invest some of what she called the family money with me, because she could make money out of it. And her rule was, if we can't resell it, we have to be able to let it out if we can't sell it. Because she'd been alive longer than I had, and she wasn't quite as gung ho as me. And so she basically, and also her father was a bank manager, and so she knew a few things about money. And she sort of went, okay, that's the rule. So I had to kind of rethink the way that I was sort of looking at things. And I was walking around going, there's a plot of land available in Shoreditch, which is building enough to build a house. It's on the high street, and we can get it for £110,000. And she'd be like, looking back on it, I go, the plot of land alone would be worth 1.1 million at this stage, and with a building on it, we're talking 4.5 million. And I'm really gutted we didn't do it, but she would just look at it and go, it's too risky. And so she really made sure that we were very, very, very careful. She was the sage and wise person, and really what I needed, because when the world fell off a cliff in 2007, we didn't have to sell anything. And I mean, we obviously had problems, and we had to really batten down the hatches. Just bought a house for cash that had been squatted in for the last 4 years of its life, which is in a very bad state, had lots of massive holes in walls rather than doors in walls and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of work to do. Um, but I think that it sort of it allowed us to always be able to have well, if this doesn't work, then we can always go and do this instead, or if this doesn't work, then there's an alternative route. And that kind of it taught me a lot about risk. Just for her coming into the business, really taught me a lot about risk and how to see things in a different manner. So it was good. It was good.
So how
But
would
yeah, so
you?
I'd started off doing flips
Yeah,
rather than just building a portfolio.
sure. And did you start that? I imagine from what you've implied there that the flips at some point turned into maybe holding on to one or two or 10. Is that how it went, or and was that straight out of uni, or was there a bit where you went and got a job, or how did that go?
No, I've had a job for 3 months of my entire life. Not including Saturday jobs or cutting trees down in people's gardens for a weekend or something. That was I remember that because that was the first £50 a day I ever made, which was, for me a really big wage.
Big 5
And then the 3 months that I spent employed, I'm not sure I was ever paid for actually, but I was definitely too disruptive, and they weren't willing to turn it into a long-term career, sort of thing. Um, and plus, I nearly sold my soul while I was doing that. So I've never worn a watch, and I found in my 3 months that I used to walk home and look in the windows of watch shops, looking at Tag Heuers and dreaming about owning a Tag Heuer. And I realized that there was something going wrong with my psyche if that was what I was becoming interested in, having never worn a watch. So, um, yeah, um, I think the ending up going from flipping into buy-to-let was purely because of my mum's rule. And so in different stages, it's been much better to do buy-to-lets, and in different stages, it's been better to do developments. And that's generally what I've kind of focused on. And I think really the meeting Simon Zucchi was what slightly changed my attitude to that. Um, we went to live in Mexico for a little while, and I ran things back home while I was living in Mexico. I kind of put everything in a kind of systemized manner, managed to run it at about 1 hour a day, which kind of worked quite well. And to go to Mexico, I'd given up the building firm that I was running because that was the thing that really took a lot of time. So I had a kind of portfolio that I was running back home, and I sort of, while I kind of, I guess, thought about what I was going to do when I got back home, because I realized that, I'm a slightly, I guess you'd call it nervous person, but I can't really sit still for very long. I get bored very, very quickly. And I will therefore, I'll never retire because I'm just not going to sit in a chair and watch TV. It's just never going to happen. I will literally commit harikiri if I have to do that. So while we were in Mexico, I was just kind of thinking, well, what shall I do? And I read lots of business and property books, property related books. And Simon's was actually the most interesting and informative book that I read at the time. And I wanted to, it was in 2009 when we left and 2011 when we came back. And I really wanted to know how the world had changed, because obviously the banks had fallen off a cliff. The world had fallen off a cliff. We had a property that we spent 3 months trying to get lending on because we bought it for cash, and slowly NatWest got further and further away from us and didn't answer us. And we sort of went, okay, we better find out what on earth we can do instead. So when I came back, I signed up to Simon Zutchi's mastermind program, which I thought was tremendous. I didn't really go to it to learn about property, because I've been investing. Well, I actually bought my first property before Simon did, so that will tell you quite how long I've been investing in property. But I went because I wanted to learn what the changes were, and then also he had this online portal which was a great network. And I thought, okay, my mother had passed away in 2009, and so I'd lost my business partner from a business perspective. Obviously, slightly more significant than that from a personal perspective. Um, and I kind of thought, well, so I need more people, because the only people I'd ever talked to in property, other than my mother and my father, who was a conveyancing solicitor, had been the builders merchants and the people delivering the stuff from the builders merchants, the actual builders who were my workforce, and then the estate agents. Yeah, and that was it. Like beyond that, like who else did I need? There wasn't it. So I'd never been networking before, before I went to Mexico. And when I came back, I kind of met Simon. And within 3 months, he'd asked me to launch Canary Wharf Pin. And my whole life within kind of networking and the way I did real estate, the way I thought about business really, really changed, because I realized how valuable people can be when you connect with them.
Well,
Um,
before we get into that, which I'm excited to do, a couple of questions. One, for anyone new to the podcast, you mentioned Simon Zucchi's book. What's the name of the book?
the book is called Property Magic. Um, and it's a book for beginners. So if you've done an awful lot in property, it's not going to be for you. But if you're interested in property, or you've been doing it, you've done a few buy to lets and that sort of thing, it's still really. Some of the rules won't apply now, but I think he revises it once every couple of years to make sure it's up to date and that sort of thing. And yeah, he likes to teach people, and he always has liked to teach people. And I think, obviously he's a guru, as it were, although he's one of the gurus who actually practices what he preaches. So he will have, you can't be in business without pissing a few people off, right? And there'll be people who went through mastermind who didn't do anything with it,
Sure.
who failed, and some people who spent too much money on it, who
Mm.
then came across afterwards and went, I can't believe I spent all that money and didn't get anything. But I think a lot of people get a lot out of it and get a lot out of his pin meetings and that sort of thing.
I completely agree with that summary. And in terms of like people starting out, actually, I know there is someone listening now. Then it's one of probably the three books that I would recommend you start with, as sort of the Holy Trinity or the Unholy Trinity for the atheists amongst us. So that would be that one. Plus, for me, it would be Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and then probably The Richest Man in Babylon as a nice aperitif.
Uh,
None of them too
it's funny.
difficult.
I was going to say the Man in Barry one instead of Rich Dad Poor Dad. So
Well, there
there
you
we are.
go.
I don't disagree with you at all.
And then my second question, now we've got that out of the way, was around you said you were keen, and I'm keen to find out then, your mum was maybe averse to land deals or more risky sort of off market, not off market, but like ground up type of deals. And then you wanted to find out, you said that at different times in the market cycle, you found that one tends to be more profitable than the other. What did you learn about that? For example, what should people do now, or what can people learn from what you learned?
Well, so I just think that so I mean, we get kind of, I guess, once you go into the psychology of real estate, you get
Mm,
into quite a deep subject because some real estate is actually, so theoretically, it's retail, right? You're making a product and you're selling it to a retail customer, yeah.
mm,
But um, it's actually different to just about any other product out there in terms of marketing and sales. Okay, and there are I can't remember his name actually. Rory, somebody. He's a great, proper grey haired marketeer. Um, I would take time to look up his name, but I can't remember. And anyway, he said he compares real estate to dating apps, so to the kind of dating market, and then also to people leaving university and getting their first job. So that part of HR. Okay. And I think the reason why he compares those three is because what you really want to know as the customer is all the bad bits. But the only adverts that you get are all the good bits. And so actually, you're buying things with completely the wrong information. And the reason why is so if we take that to real estate, um, when you go and look at the real estate market, you're searching by your price point, which you don't really do almost. I mean, not even for a car do you search by a price point. Yeah, and certainly nothing else do you really search in price point as your kind of main criteria. And then you go, so I want with it up to that price, yeah, and then I want 3 bedrooms or more,
mm.
blah blah blah. And it's like it tells you the practical bits. It doesn't tell you anything about the property. And if it looks good in photographs, that doesn't mean it's nice to live in. Yeah? And you only get one viewing of it when you're going to spend every day for the next, what, anywhere between 1 and 12 years living in things, sometimes 50 years, if you take my parents' example. And actually, what it's like in the advert makes no sense whatsoever in comparison to what it's like to live in. Like, there's very, very little correlation between the two. And what you actually want from the advert is these are the things that people might not like. Yeah. Because if I don't mind, and this was Rory's example, he really likes trains. Yeah. And trains stop running after midnight. So they never keep him awake. Yeah. So he'll pay more money for a house with a train in the back garden, whereas most people will pay a lot less money for a house with a train in the back garden. Do you see what I mean? And so that's the kind of thing that really you want to advertise real estate with. But real estate is also, it's unusual because it's an incredibly inefficient market. Okay, so whereas in like stocks and shares, for example,
Mm.
you've got millions of people all over the world, or hundreds of thousands of them, who are basically valuing Tesla stock on any given day.
Mm.
Only got your emotions valuing the price of the building and how much you're willing to pay for it if you're a homeowner. Yeah. So actually, in terms of the retail market, it's the most inefficient market that there is because it's really driven by the emotional response that people get. And they will bid 10, 100, £1 million extra, depending on the price bracket of the property, because they like it.
I see. So with Tesla,
The
if,
word
if the
like
price
comes
is
into it.
if the price is $100 for a one Tesla share, then that's the price, and then you're going to pay $100, whether regardless of what your top price might be, that's going to be the price you're going to
Yeah.
pay.
Yeah. And
Whereas
don't
with
get
the
me wrong, if Elon Musk has been a twat this week, then the price will
some
go down to
bargains,
$75 pretty quickly. Yeah.
yeah,
But,
yeah,
but that's what the whole world decides that's the price.
I see.
Yeah. And
Whereas if
everyone
you
has
get
to pay the same price.
Yeah, and if you get two people interested in one Smith Street, and there's two, for example, women who are both really love it because it's got a lovely garden, or two guys who both love it because it's got a lovely garden, suddenly that 100 grand house or whatever it might be in your area is suddenly 150 grand, 200, 250. It can go anywhere, so the price is quite volatile. Is that roughly what you're saying, or can be?
Yeah, so that's effectively what I'm saying. I mean, to the point where I sat in, I used to go to auctions quite a bit
Mm.
in London. So the Stretton's auction was my favourite, and I've seen two people bidding against each other that basically got the hump with each other in the room and overpaid by £30,000 because they had a hump on something that they should have bought for 70,000. So they paid 30% extra for a product because they decided they were going to outbid each other. I mean, like, what the hell is going on there, right?
Right. Okay. So what does that tell us then about? So what does that tell us, for example, about whether right now I should be out there buying land or buying houses if I could buy either?
Well, so I think for me, it told me things like where to go.
Mm.
Yeah. So I always see up and coming areas because of who's there and what the kind of, what the community's like. So artistic people tend to move in, make the place a bit nicer, and then the people who can afford to start buying their places move in because they like what the artistic people done. And then Costa Coffee comes along and goes, oh, I put a Costa in there because we got some people who can afford to drink it now. And so you go from the coffee that comes in a kind of an old glass to the coffee that comes in a paper cup, and then some and then over time it just sort of escalates. And whereas it's a very different way of looking at it, let's say looking at through people's emotions, to the institutions who tend to look at it and go, what price is it now, like what's the infrastructure being built, how can we turn it into this, and blah, 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 blah. Um, and so I think it starts with that, and then it goes to, just quite simply, if you're uncertain about the state in the market, and of course, no one's got a crystal ball,
Mm.
and that's why I kind of want to slightly avoid answering your question,
Sure.
because you're saying, how do I predict the future? And the answer is, I don't predict the future. I just try and second guess it, but equally have an A/B strategy where if A doesn't work, I can always go to B, which will work in any market.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, what it comes down to is that we buy in, and okay, so a great example of this is so the last business I ran, which you were involved with in a way,
Mm.
and didn't have a happy ending with, was we were looking to buy a house in Hampstead. Well, it was a plot of land in Hampstead.
Mm.
As my memory is, it did actually have a kind of an old school building on it, which needed tearing down, and we were going to put four houses on the plot. Um, and the market was just quite uncertain. Yeah.
Mm.
And because of the uncertainty in the market, the non-guarantee of the exit, and the fact that in that particular location we couldn't turn them into buy to let because we're building £3 million houses, and
That's
you can't turn a £3 million house into a buy to let, right? It just doesn't wash its face. So our kind of, we made the choice to, and we let go of £1 million the day that we decided to do that. Yeah, because we'd invested £1 million in that.
mm.
And all our, gladly in that particular instance, all our investors got paid back from the profit from the deal, etc. Um, with all their interest owed and things. But our decision was we can work on this for the next 2 years, and we can maybe, make a small profit. The chances are at best it's going to break even, and we
Mm.
could lose a lot of money, or we could lose a relatively significant amount of money today and just call it quits. And
Mm.
so being able to kind of decide to do that was something we did really because when I kind of assessed it, I sort of went, okay, we can't make it wash its face. If the
Mm.
downturn actually happens, it won't do, it'll do really badly. And therefore, you want to be able to, my mum's rule was you want to be able to, develop it and make a profit. But if it turns, everyone knows that when you're developing, it might take 6 months, it might take 2 years, sometimes it takes 5 years if you're doing a large build to rent scheme with 500 apartments in it,
Yeah.
and mixed use and that sort of thing. At which point there's a long time for the world to suffer a COVID event or a black swan event or whatever, and you just never know what's going to happen. So you kind of want to have a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D, ideally, that you can get out of Dodge. And we learnt in prosperity, ideally, we would be selling it in advance. Of course, we didn't always manage to do it.
No, sure.
But
Well, that was the plot. So to summarize all of that, would be, and you stop me when I go wrong here. First of all, Black Swan events sound better than they are, don't they? Black Swan events aren't very nice, but they sound
yeah, they
great.
look lovely.
Yeah.
from afar.
Love a black swan on a lake. Brilliant. I haven't seen black swan in ages, but you don't want an event in to turn up. Anyway, the summary
Well,
would be
so I think it's the if you're hidden inside a black swan's feathers, you can't really see what's going on, and that's the problem with the black swan event,
yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. That's what you can take from today. Was is in short, have a plan B, you know, and if possible, have a plan C and plan D. And if you're looking down the line thinking, hang on a minute, my plan B seems to have wandered off, then do something pretty quickly. You know, maybe take a loss if you have to, whatever. None of this constitutes financial advice. In order to make sure that you remain safe and in the game. You mentioned to go back then to our timeline. You mentioned you then became host of Canary Wharf Pin, which was one of the first pin meetings I ever went to. Obviously, at the time, wouldn't have dreamed of coming to speak to the host because I was just getting started then. What year? What year did you start that? Roughly.
I think it would have been 2012, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I started invested in 11, 12. So, and I probably attended this meeting
Yeah.
at about 13. So yeah, I was wet behind the ears, and so, but it was a good meeting. What did you learn from your new open mind with all the networking, or who did you meet and what did you pick up? What was that stage of life like?
So, I mean, I think a lot of good things and some hard lessons is what I learnt.
Mm,
Um, I think I was too desperate for a to have another business partner because I've
mm,
been in business with my mum, and I think I felt slightly um, despite the fact that I was, definitely one of the more experienced people on the property mastermind course that Simon was running, I continuously suffer from imposter syndrome in a certain sort of way. You know, it's just
mm,
one of those
mm.
things.
Sure.
And I think mostly it's because I still feel like I'm somewhere between 13 and 17. I've never really grown up. And it was having children that made me realize that people saw me as an adult, but it only happens when my children are around and they know my children. I think generally when I walk around my children, they think, why the fuck are they with a really old guy? They must be really sad, right? Because I remember a few of those really old guys when we, had our kind of friend cruise and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, so I think that kind of one of the things that I learned was, don't get into bed with people too quickly,
Mm,
as it were. And I think that that's, I've had a couple of business partners who just really weren't the right people, to be in business with, whether it was our characters just clashed and didn't work together,
sure.
or whether it was that they were actually quite evil or just did stupid things or whatever.
Mm,
And sometimes you're not necessarily sure whether they're being evil or just stupid. You can't really tell the difference sometimes. And I tend to be someone who gives them the benefit of the doubt, but suffers the consequences as a result, right? Because I see the good in people, and I
mm,
like people generally. I actually really, really enjoy people. I think I'm the kind of person I can sit down next to the tramp on the street and chat to them about God knows what. And I've got kind of slightly Zen philosophy that they'll tell me wise things, even though, they're drooling through their words because they've had too many cans of Stella or tenants on the way. Um, so, but I think also, I mean, I learned, the first day I ever hosted Canary Wharf Pin, I'd spent a lot of time trying to work out what I was meant to say and that sort of thing, and watching Andy Haynes, who was running Blackfriars at the time,
mm.
thinking, you're just the most perfect host in the world. Because every time you say it, it's like it's pre-rehearsed so many times. And of course, he used to be a radio host.
Right.
So that's not surprising. He's so good at talking.
Yeah.
And I stand up and I go, like this. And I remember when I got up there the first night of Canary Wharf, the event ended, and I almost didn't realize it had yet begun. And then people started coming up to me and going, "Oh, that was really good. That was really good." And I kind of like, "Really?" And I've been this dazed the whole way through. Um, but I learned very quickly that actually I don't really mind getting up in front of people. I don't get, I was massively like, crapping myself before that event, and
Mm,
then the second and third. But by the fifth event, I was like, yeah, well, it wasn't really that scary. And I've just actually written, so I kind of been writing some posts in advance for to put out on LinkedIn, and I just wrote one which was so the quote is actually from Alex Hormozy's wife. And her quote is that she said was, "Fear is as wide as a lake, but it's only an inch deep." Yeah,
mm.
and it's kind of really like it looks like this massive thing that you can't escape. If you want to cross to the other side, you're going to have to drown or suffer drowning. But actually, just kind of get your feet wet. right? And that's not really that bad,
That's a
and
great
that's
quote. I really like that.
generally there is it's just not. And I remember obviously there's my two favorite acronyms are, and I'm going to swear, so if you don't like it, dock your ears, fuck everything and run, and then false expectation about reality. And I think they're lovely trying to juxtaposition of that kind of fear thing. And public speaking is one of those things. It's like the thing people fear most after death, or something like that, weirdly, statistically. And actually, when you do it kind of the first time, yeah, it's absolutely petrifying. And then you go, yeah, whatever. And now I would be more scared to talk in front of 5 people than 5,000 people,
Mm.
because it's really personal when it's 5 people. Whereas actually when it's 5,000 people, they're just this sea, and you can talk to them all you want. You just try and get eye contact with a few in the front row. You'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah. Billy Connolly said that, didn't he? He
Um,
said he'd much rather perform to Wembley or a big stadium because he said when you tell a joke in a big stadium, it can be pretty bad, and because only a few people have got to find it funny, and you send the joke out there, and about half a second later, this sort of laugh rolls back at you, and like rolls over you like a warm bath, right? Whereas if there's 10 people in a
yeah,
pub, it's pretty obvious if no one finds it funny because there's just a horrible silence. So yeah, the
yeah,
large
yeah,
room
yeah,
stuff,
yeah, yeah. Well, and they don't feel as though they've got to follow the crowd either, because when there's only 10 of them,
there
there
isn't
isn't a
one.
crowd to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I
Um.
definitely think that's true. Great man, Billy Connolly. Great
Yeah.
man. Love
Yes.
his stuff.
Uh,
So anyway, sorry, just in terms of things I learned.
mm,
One of the things I learned that first day as well. So you know that YPN magazine was connected with Simon and pin meetings, and it still is.
mm,
I see, when if ever I go to a pin meeting now, I run into someone that I know from YPN, because they asked me to do some articles for them and things. And the first meeting I ran, I spent 30 seconds holding a YPN and saying, it's a great magazine, blah 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 blah, and that 30 seconds earned me £100 in commission. So
oh,
I that was like quite a big lesson about stage time and stage presence and what it actually meant to be the person at the front of the room. And I
mm,
kind of went, wow, that was a pretty short, sharp shock, because like £100 for the hour it took me to speak was all right, but £100 for the 10 seconds or 30 seconds it took to say that was really good.
mm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it changed my perspective. Not that I like being at the front of the room, but it changed my perspective on, why Simon. It taught me a lot about what Simon does and what people who run those sorts of events. I went recently to a Roger Hamilton event
Mm.
because I really like Roger Hamilton and what he did with wealth dynamics. And I use wealth dynamics, for example, in when I grow my businesses, when I grow the team, and that sort of thing. And if you don't know about wealth dynamics and you're in the audience, please go and look it up. It's tremendous. And we will be selling them cheaper than you can get them anywhere else on TableNetwork if you want to, as soon as our shop's up and running, which should take probably about the next 30 days. Um, but and kind of the way that Roger runs his room, he kind of like his ability to stand there and talk to 100 people, and he's not a star like Simon is. He's
No,
just a creative person
introvert,
like
isn't it?
me.
Yeah.
But the way, yeah, and he's quite introverted. When you talk to him in person, you're like, wow, I never realized he was so
Very
uneasy
shy.
talking to
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Like, I mean, we have a lot in common. We watch the same podcasts.
Mm.
We've got a lot of kind of various things to talk about. But it's quite clear he's just feeling slightly uncomfortable the whole time you talk to him. But he's a great, I mean, done some great stuff. And him being on stage means that he can absolutely kind of sell 100 grand's worth of stuff in one day, and that feels like it's worthwhile, because at 20% profit on cost, that's still a good wage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Roger Hamilton's a good person to follow. YPN magazine for anyone new is Your Property Network magazine is worth checking out. Um, okay, so that's what you learned from networking and from the people you were meeting there.
Yeah, a
What
couple of things.
a couple of things. I'd say more than a couple. Some excellent stuff. So, that was it. Before we get on to sort of what happened next, or what did you do with that? You mentioned that the difficulty, and maybe a difficulty for everybody, but especially for you personally, that you were struggling. You found some business partners who were toxic, bad, whatever, at different times, or whatever, didn't work out. What would you say to anyone? Because I think it's quite common for people to be looking around in property and trying to find people to work with, business partners, and of course, when it goes well, you look at the likes of Rob Moore and Mark Homer, it can go really, really well. But sometimes I've seen business relationships and stuff break down. If people are looking for business partners, how can people, in your experience, how can people do their best to make sure they're getting a good business partner, or to vet people in advance, or is it impossible?
Um, I think it's not easy,
Mm.
certainly. Um, so I'm gonna blame it on my mum again, because I owe her so many things that I've learnt in the world.
Sure.
so I think it was her who said to me, you know, when if you think that you've found yourself a girl that you want to marry, go on holiday with her. Yeah, because it puts you in unusual and extreme and stressful situations, which are going to get you to the point where you know, you treat each other like you will later on in your marriage. At which point you may as well know now, you know. And I think that's so I would. Okay, a few times I've been on a thing called prop ski, and actually they've just come back. I
Mm.
didn't go this year because I'm not currently doing anything real estate. But it's a great event. It's sort of it's a bit like MIPIM, and anyone who's in real estate will know what MIPIM is probably. But so it's 300 to 400 people who are based in UK property. It's normally the kind of the industry rather than the domestic side of property.
Yeah.
So people who work for Iceni or St George or those kind of companies, and they go to the same resort for the same week, and they all ski together, and they do
Oh.
lots of kind of charitable events while they're there, and some races and some lectures and that sort of thing. But so one year, it was the second year I went, and I decided to get a chalet, and I got it with some people that were working with me on a particular project.
Mm.
So there were four companies that took the chalet together in the end. We all paid our way,
Mm.
and the bonds that we made during that week meant that we could have done anything together, because once you've been saving each other's lives when you fall over, or stopping each other hurting yourself, or looking after each other, you gain just a lot of respect for each other.
Mm.
And you learn who you don't want to be in business with very, very quickly. Yeah,
Yeah.
because either they just turn into a complete twat when they're drunk and a
Mm.
complete arsehole, and you never want to see them again, or they leave you behind when you're the one in trouble or whatever, and they don't really, and you just go, well, okay, so I'm never working with them again. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel as though so a lot about being in business with someone, you've got to see them a lot. You want to be able to celebrate the good times, but also get through the bad times. And it's getting
Mm.
through the bad times, which is a difficult bit. And you want to know they've got the right level of ethics, which are the same as yours and that tie into yours. Because if they're far more ethical than you are, they're just going to be just as bad as if they're far less ethical than you are, right? Because they're just going to be really needy and wanty when you want to tell them to fuck off if they're really ethical.
Yeah.
And I know that. I mean, I'm because of my dad, I'm a very, very ethical person, and people who aren't ethical, they just really piss me off very quickly. So I've just learned to, you know, get to know people first and only spend time with people I really, really enjoy
Mm.
spending time with. Yeah, and those are
Interesting.
the only people I work with. And I want them to be really good at what they do, but I can never change their ethics. I can never change who they are as people. You can, and I do that the same with employees as well. I can teach them everything about the business that I want them to do, but I can't change their character because their
Mm.
parents helped them gain that.
Mm.
And I'm never gonna, you've got your character by the time you're 7 or something. Yeah.
Kind
So
of
if,
fixed.
yeah, I think in a lot of ways it is.
What you're talking about
Um,
there with skiing sounds a lot like kind of like Hell Week for the Navy SEAL. Sounds like a lot like army training, or like they did for that film. Was it Saving Private Ryan where they sent them all off and they all, did all the bonding stuff that they do with army training? It sounds a lot like that. And it sounds similarly. I mean, apart from there's a lot more skiing involved, of course, but it seems like that's the whole point, isn't it? That you're going to get to know somebody, the good, the bad, and the ugly, get underneath the surface of it. The same as your idea about holiday, pretty damn quick, which is an excellent tip.
yeah, I think that's certainly the value that I get from it, and I
Mm.
think different people get different amounts of value from it.
Sure.
But so I'm very much someone, having never had a job in my life other than for 3 months. I kind of took a view very, very early on in life, and it was because of something that happened to me in my childhood, that I was always going to enjoy every single thing I did.
Mm.
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons why I kind of I really want to know that I'm enjoying myself as much as possible with these people so that I can then enjoy myself with them later on as well. And that's why I organized that chalet to happen during Prop Ski, was specifically for that reason, because I just wanted to know that if I ring, I'm the person who they're going to answer the phone to. And they want to know that I'm going to do that. I know I'll do that. I just want to be the person on the other end as well,
Yeah,
to get the
absolutely.
same response. And I want to know that, we can have a whiskey together when it's all over. And actually, I love chatting with them because they're really
Mm.
interesting,
Mm.
rather than me just going, yeah, that's fine, but I'm never going to invite you to the after party,
Mm.
because that's not what you want. Have your work business partners, isn't it? Yeah. He's great until 5, and then I just run out of the office as quick as I
Yeah,
can.
can't stand to see him another fortnight. Um,
You know.
uh, okay, cool. Well, that's so I think we've covered that bit. What happened then? I think is it around the time, trying to keep some vague timeline here. Is this about the time you got into prosperity and started that? Am I in the right bit? Have I missed any bits out?
Well, no. So I mean, I think I went through. I got very one significant thing I got into was well, I called them at the time LHA tenants, but
Mm,
basically social tenants.
mm,
And I started and ran for 2 years a social enterprise where we housed at-risk women.
okay.
And it was really, I mean, like, I'm a creative person, and I also come from a father who's a lawyer, a solicitor. So I
Mm,
really like things that I'm in my brain. I think of them as loopholes,
mm,
but they're really kind of ways of putting strategies together and going, oh, that's really interesting. And I happened to be at I think it was on Mastermind, and Mike Frisbee, I don't know
mm.
if you've met him
Yeah, no,
before,
Mike. Yeah.
but so he came and spoke for about three-quarters of an hour, and he was talking about LHA and strategies. And he said something that I kind of went, oh, all right, that's interesting. Anyway, so I went and had a look. And I realized that within zone two in London, I could get a 13% gross yield at the current market value of the properties that I was particularly interested in. I kind of went, oh, well, that's interesting because everyone else is getting about a 5.5% gross yield on the same property. So that sounds really good. So basically, I kind of started something which I started investing into that. And then I started the social enterprise so that we could house at risk people and then use a lot of profit and put it towards their social care.
All
So
right.
that was the idea.
Mm,
And it worked very well. And for 2 years, we raised about £7,500 each month for charity, which we put towards the social care. So
wow.
it gave me a kind of good feeling to get out of bed in the morning and to keep
Yeah,
on doing it.
crikey. Yeah.
Um, but at the end of the day, it wasn't. I'm very creative. I get bored really quickly, and I got bored really quickly, and I kind of went. So I handed it over to the charities, and that was the period of time when actually I got involved with Fraser and Gavin, and we started Prosperity.
Mm,
And I'd been 3 months before that, I'd been chatting to some other people that people might have heard of. So Brad Paul, Thierry Lemaire, and we were talking about something else as well. In fact, Thierry wasn't the person who was there then. He was the person who replaced me because I said, I haven't got time. I'm doing too much on the social enterprise. So I would have been developing with Prab, but in the end, we did it with I did it with Gavin and Fraser.
mm. Okay.
Um,
The the
yeah.
social enterprise stuff sounds good. You know that I can say honestly that unfortunately I've never got myself into a position where I'm giving £7,500 a month to charity. So that's impressive.
Well, as I said, it gave me a good reason to. Like when you lie in bed in the morning and you kind of go, you flap your eyes and go, okay, there's no coffee yet. It's a good time to get up. But to have something kind of more than that
Mm,
gives you a real get up. I really like get up and go, and I kind of, I mean, at the moment with, I'm building a new company at the moment, and it's a very long dark tunnel, and you can't see the light at the other end.
mm,
So I have a thing where when I'm in this period of time, over time, I have to do more and more things that kind of give me a reason to um, activate the kind of self mastery mindset, in myself. So it was about a month ago that I kind of went, right, I need a mantra to say to myself in the shower every morning, in that way that Tony Robbins does. And
mm,
so I literally wrote, and I haven't done it for about 7 years or something. I haven't written myself a mantra. I kind of went, right, I need to give myself a mantra. So I gave myself a mantra. And it took about 2 mornings. I was like, right now I feel really fired up.
yeah.
I'm good for about 3 weeks.
Mm,
But I just, you kind of need things to keep you going through life. And I'm lucky. I'm really, really lucky. I find it very easy
mm,
to find these little mechanisms. And I tend to be able to apply them to myself when I need them, kind of thing, quite easily. Um, but uh, but yeah, a lot of people don't, and that's one of the reasons. So I've always given money to charity back when I used to paint pictures,
mm,
and we were talking about art
mm,
before the call started. Um, and back when I used to paint, I used to give 10% of the money that I sold my pictures for to the Child Cancer Trust, I think it was called back in the day. Um, and I think I've just kind of, just always done that because I was born with a silver spoon, and frankly, I don't deserve all the money. It's just, and nowadays I think, well, the more I can not give to Rishi Sunak, the better.
mm.
It's the other side of looking at it.
Yeah.
So we got the same with TableNetwork. We've pledged to give 20% of all our profits to help homeless charities.
Mm,
Although the plan is not to always necessarily just give it to charity, but but create direct action. So at some point, we will be putting it towards building a portfolio because I believe in permanent housing, not temporary housing. Yeah, there's no people point in taking this kind of this idea where I liked helping at-risk women. They were normally women who'd been beaten up or just
Mm,
got out of jail and were fallen on the hard times. And the idea is that you can get them out of their negative spiral and actually send them on a positive spiral, right? And you can't. There's lots of things that you can't do that with. Some things you're just sustaining a status quo.
mm,
Yeah. So if you're dealing with someone who's got a disease which is basically debilitating for the rest of their lives,
mm,
there's a limit to how much corner you can turn from them
mm.
for them. And just personally, I prefer to help with the things where we can help people and they can really make a difference and come back into society having been lost and find their reason for purpose for living again rather than be lost. And I'm like you, I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in having a reason to get up in the morning and start making hay, or
Oh,
do whatever you're doing. Right?
yeah, and anyone who's been around for a while, by a while, I mean about 5 minutes, can see that everyone has bad days and good days, and that we're all about one or two bad decisions away from really rough times, and so people who have made those bad decisions deserve a second chance, right? And so it's great if you can give it to them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so so you mentioned that this is probably the point where you get into prosperity, and so what happened there? What did you learn from that? What went well? What went badly?
So a lot went very badly in the end. It went very well for the first sort of 5 years. So
Sure.
we got together. So Gavin was running the Blackfriars pin, I was running the Canary Wharf pin, and Fraser happened to be running the Kensington pin. So we're running the three biggest pins in the UK, I think probably, and also the three biggest meetings in London at the
Mm,
time. Um, and we just kind of went, okay, how can we had a meeting with girls to work out how we could leverage what we were doing so it worked better for our businesses. And we weren't in business with each other at the time. And we decided really within the space of about 15 minutes that we were going to start doing some developments together in London. And of course, we never ended up doing a development in London. I think we did one small house flip in the end. Um, but it wasn't, I think I quite wanted to do something which was going to stretch my abilities and stretch my comfort zone. I like stretching my comfort zone a lot. That's
mm.
something that I don't really. I think maybe I don't have a comfort zone.
I'm
Uh,
gonna say, surprised you've not broken it by now.
yeah. Well. So anyway, and we ended up we found a site in Derby. It was a kind of old car park. I think it had lapse planning for offices and they didn't really stack and this and that and the other. And we've been interested in the kind of, just looking at different asset management and how different asset management, different varieties of asset management change the valuation of things when
Mm,
you get to the other end. So, for example, with social housing, if you lease to a social housing provider, the yield that you kind of compress things with gets is allowed to be a lot smaller because you kind of do a much bigger multiple sort of thing. So a bit like when you do a commercial valuation, if you get your client as Tesco, then the bank goes, oh well, we'll give you 10 times Tesco's rent. Yeah. Whereas if you get your NISA local, they'll give you 7 times NISA local's rent. And if you get Mr. Harari, who's never been heard of before, they'll give you 3 times his rent because they never know if he's going to fuck up or if they're pretty sure that Tesco won't. Yeah. So that's kind of a brief way of explaining that sort of valuation idea.
mm,
And we just sort of saw in Derby that PBSA, which is purpose-built student accommodation,
mm,
was needed in the centre of town. The university wanted to move a lot of their accommodation into the centre of town. And we kind of spoke to the local authority and then also to the university, and we kind of went, okay, this looks like it'd be the right thing to do. And then so I think one of the things which Gavin and I were really, we both had the same mindset about was that, and this, I think maybe both of us have suffered it during our lives, but I can only really talk from my own experience. So when I was running a building firm, yeah, and I ran a construction firm for about 8 years, and I was always I was employing people who did things which I didn't know how to do. But basically, I wanted to learn how they did it first before I employed them. And then I could make sure that because on the building site, you've got a lot of people who are doing stuff and they tell you that it's right, even though when it's wrong, and you have nothing to say about it because you don't know what they're doing, right? And any homeowner will know exactly what I'm talking about at this point because builders come along and they say all sorts of crap, which is just, you know, pure, rubble over what you've said to them before, and they just go, yeah, whatever you said is completely because look, there's a pile of rubble there, right? So what you said means nothing. What I've said means everything, and frankly, it's really heavy, and you don't want to clear it up at this point. So we're just gonna, pay us more money. We'll make it good. Is normally what the kind of result of the conversation is. And so I learned while I was working with builders that actually how to get the best people in is the right thing to do. Know enough about what they do that you can actually talk to them about it and work out whether they're pulling the wool over your eyes or not, but make sure that they are the best in class to do what they do. And I learned the value of when I was started to use lawyers, and then when I started to use, estate agents, I worked out which ones were good for selling, which ones were good for buying, etc. But and I would only work with the people who are really, really good. And so for the scheme in Derby, the PBSA scheme, we were doing a lot of things that we'd never done before at a scale that we hadn't done. And so we went and we JV'd with a development management company. And the guy who was running that had built tower blocks in Liverpool and that sort of thing. He'd done a lot of stuff that was far bigger than we were looking at.
Yeah.
And we gave him a part of the pie, a piece of the pie, so that he had a really good vested interest to make sure that R1 was the one that went according to plan of all the other ones that he had on his books that month, right? And then we made sure that we went to the best in class. So, and then it just happened that Gavin and I were sitting in the offices of JLL with their head of financing for institutional financing for the likes of PBSA, for alternative real estate assets. And his name was Martin LeGrice, who's a great guy and taught me so much almost in one comment, which I'll come on to in a moment. And we were discussing the idea of it being funded by Aviva, okay, but they would fund it as it was being built and then own it at the end. We were like, we never heard of this. What the hell is that? So like you learn a new thing every day, hopefully. And so he actually organized what's called the strip lease, and now they're kind of quite run of the mill. At the time, they were relatively, I guess, unusual in PBSA, and certainly we got a record-breaking yield at the time for the Midlands sort of thing. So we basically borrowed the money to build it at a rate of 4.5% interest, okay, which included a repayment.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that's a very low interest rate.
Yeah, right.
And we were guaranteed the sale price at the back end.
Mm.
Yeah, we were guaranteed the sale to happen at the back end. So it just sort of massively de-risked, and and the actual valuation dropped by about £500,000 on the £20 million deal.
Mm.
But because we saved about £400,000 in just interest alone, and that was on the basis that we didn't have any overruns and any extra spending and blah blah blah, which on the development project of well, your first ever development project of 17 million is quite likely, right? So that sort of thing to happen. So we just massively de-risked the project. And I kind of went, wow, that was. But so the biggest learning I had from Martin was in that same meeting. He said, so we were trying to organise a lease with the university for 30 years, where it was called a strip lease because they would be stripping away at the lease as they paid for it over a 30-year period. And at the end of 30 years, it would cost them £1 to own the building.
No.
But they had to make sure that they met every single payment along the way, which was 330,000 a year, or roughly. Okay, and we had to arrange that and negotiate that and all the terms in that at the same time as we were negotiating the terms for the funding from Aviva to happen. And he said, "Okay, so we've got all the pieces in the plane of the plane, and we're flying already, and we haven't quite built the plane yet, and we've got to make sure the undercarriage is fixed in the plane before it lands. Are you up for this?" That sort of thing. And I just thought that's a really good analogy for most of life, actually. And
Yeah.
that's sort of just that I've looked back on that comment and kind of gone, yeah, all right, we're back at that stage where we're building a plane in the air. And every time I kind of set out a new venture and have to go on a really steep learning curve, I think, oh, we're building a plane in the air again.
Yeah, it's good. It's useful.
Um,
And yeah. So what what happened then? That sounds great.
yeah, so it seemed very good, and that project went incredibly well.
Mm.
Um, And I think the kind of, so the biggest sort of learning thing was, which I sort of in a way came across with on that, was get the right people around you.
Yeah.
Understand what you can't do. Make
Mm,
sure you got the best of the best to do that for you. And paying you pay for what you get.
mm,
Obviously, you've got to shop around and make sure you're paying for the right people and you get on with them and you like working with them, etc., etc. But don't skimp and save if you're trying to get good quality stuff, because everyone's seen a bad tiling job, right? And everyone's seen a good tiling job. Okay, so that's when it's just tiling. But when actually it's the bit that causes the leak, because it's the plumbing, it's a bit more important. You can't see it, but actually the shape of it really, really counts because when it leaks, it makes a lot of damage and it
mm,
costs a lot of money. So I think that that's it's hugely important. Um, I think so. That whole kind of, I was always kind of doing SWOTs on myself, let's say, and making sure that I knew which bits I wasn't good at and which ones I was good at. And I did that while I was building the team in the London office. So the
mm,
team that I ran was the London office, and it was in charge of literally carrying out the development. So we were getting everything from we were finding the sites, um, assessing the sites, and my kind of rule was you put them in the bin as quickly as you can
mm,
because we want time to work on the sites we're going to have, not the sites we're going to throw away. So the faster you put them in the bin, the more time we've got to work on the valuable ones. Because it's all about efficiency, So having the systems in place that we were keeping trackers, that I was running what I call ABCDs with every one of my employees, which is kind of they write every week. They do a what they achieved, what the benefit was for the business, what their concerns are, and therefore we can discuss and work out what they need to do next about the concerns that they're having. So any questions they've got, that sort of thing. And if they do that every week, then it helps me be a better boss because, you know, I mean, I'm half introvert, half extrovert, right? So most of the time I don't want to talk to people. And frankly, I've no idea how to help them because I'm not a teacher. Your family's teachers, and I've got so much admiration for them because they do things that I can never do, right? So I have to find my way of actually being able to do that and
mm.
actuate it, in a kind of systemized manner.
Yeah.
And then having, we had all sorts of kind of trackers that went through with traffic lights on them, so they told people where to stop. I got a guy in Tex Jones who came to work for me, who he came to work for me before Prosperity, and he was just really, really systemized and kind of back office driven. And he was great, and he kind of really just tracked and analyzed everything that we were doing in terms of the sites that we were looking at and that sort of thing to make sure that that worked. And that was kind of really, really important. And then I think later on, um, I learned more and more about this, but also it's kind of, the how you kind of lower the risk that you've got. So one of the things is with real estate, you should never put all your pies in the same basket,
Mm,
yeah, or your eggs in the same basket, because if you're doing development projects, ideally you want to do each one in a different SPV or a different limited company, and that way, if one goes down, it doesn't take the others down. Now there are times when that doesn't happen, right?
sure.
But um, generally you kind of want to spread risk, and then you also I've learned, kind of over the years where there's various things you want to do in terms of finances where, within business, you first need to kind of get your business to wash its face.
Mm,
Yeah, and that's kind of the most important thing in business because the cash flow forecast should be really called can we keep the lights on. Yeah, and it is the most important kind of piece of financial, statement in the business world, the cash flow forecast, because it tells you if you can keep the lights on, right? And if you can't keep the lights on, you can't pay your employees, you go insolvent and you die. So don't die is the kind of first rule. And to do that, you have to wash your face. And then above that, you've got profits. Yeah. And so you need to be able to wash your face on almost like a SaaS model, so it's really, really regular. And then you want profits, which are far more lumpy. And ideally, you want a lot more profits than you have deficits. Yeah. So that you can then grow up that. And then as you get more profits that you don't need to spend, you want to invest in assets. And those are kind of the three levels of cash in the business. Yeah, and you want to then start diversifying those assets. So if you're building a property portfolio, there's no harm in buying a bit of Tesla stock, Bitcoin, whatever floats your boat, or a kind of a bond or something. Anything that's and in a way, the safer it is to offset the risky side, the better. Yeah. So you want to kind of do both sides, and the investments should always be really long-term plays because you are basically gazing into a crystal ball in some way with every investment you ever make. At which point you can't need to draw it out next month or in 6 months' time. It's got to be there for 4 years minimum, sort of thing. Otherwise, it's not an investment. It's just a
Yeah.
trade.
Yeah, absolutely. My business partner Chris always says one of his favorite sayings is that his crystal ball is as broken as everybody else's, and I think that's a wise a wise idea. And it's, um, it must be. I've never built a big building like the one you were talking about. I can't remember how many units it was, but it's a lot, isn't it? Big
So
old
that I think was 520 bedrooms, might have been 550 bedrooms.
right. So
Yeah,
to
it
build
wasn't
something,
small.
it was built into the skyline. Do you get a sense of pride when it's built and finished and all the rest of that, or is it more that by then is it you being you and just parroting back what you've said to me already today that by then you've moved your head's moved on to the next thing and it's full of other things, or do you get a sense of pride of having sort of changed the skyline almost? Well, you have.
So I think, yeah, no, we did change the skyline, and you could see it from the cathedral, and it was quite a big lump of red brick.
Mm.
So I am very into beautiful architecture. So no, I didn't get any pride from what it looked like. Okay, the pride that I got was knowing that the university was going to make money out of it for 30 years and then own it at the end.
Yeah.
And that was actually the bit that I thought was worthwhile from a pride perspective. And obviously the pride that, I like the fact that when I'm running a business that's really thriving, that we employ lots of people and that we generate money that goes round and, helps to build roads and keep libraries running and schools and that sort of thing. Less and less, unfortunately, the NHS, but, that's not my fault. It's Rishi's fault. Or actually many of his predecessors' fault since Thatcher, probably. Yeah, anyway, let's not get into politics. I don't vote. I don't vote with a really hand on heart for anyone because I think they're all as bad as each other. So if you want to start whinging, I'm not a Tory, then you can whinge that I'm not Labour either. Just in case you're out there and care. Uh, but yeah, so I think I got pride from the sort of weirdly the kind of financial magic wand that I discovered. Um, which obviously, I didn't particularly implement. I mean, it was me and the company who had to read every single one of the 50 pages of the legal contract 17 times before we got it signed, because I was the only one who has any, I don't have a legal background, but I come from a family that practices law. My dad practiced law, his grandfather practiced law as well as his father, and blah, blah, blah. So, I just had more ability than anyone else in the company to do that. And actually, I really get on well with lawyers. I like lawyers. They're all bright, nothing
Mm.
else. And I
Yeah.
quite like bright people, so that helps. Um, but I just generally, I really enjoy the journey, as it were. And I kind of, I haven't had to learn that from other people. I always do what I like,
Mm.
and I always do what I want to be doing. And wouldn't have been trying to grow prosperity if I hadn't enjoyed what I was doing. I would have done something else. So for me, at that point in time in my life, it was like, I'm really thriving off this. I'm a sponge, so I love learning about I used to go to all the site meetings so that I could learn from the development manager that we JV'd with what their job was and what they were doing. And I could learn also the planning advisor's job and the guy who was, I knew a lot about running a building site, but not at that scale.
Mm.
Right. So there was also certain things, and I was learning about cladding and different ways of building. We built that out of Metsec, which is kind of, like a stud frame,
Mm.
but in steel, in kind of really tiny bits of steel. The whole building was built out of that, yeah, including the outside walls, and the whole thing was kind of had massive lots of I can't remember at this stage whether it was I think it was expanded polystyrene rather than rock wool
Mm.
squidged in the middle with then plasterboard on one side and things that look like bricks on the outside sort of thing, and from it did what it needed to from the aesthetic perspective of the kind of semi-conservation era it was
Mm.
in that part of the world. But most importantly, it was giving students a place they could learn, and it was helping helping the university with its money. And from that perspective, it's like, okay, well, I feel like we're doing a good thing. I don't have to feel like I don't really agree with PBSA because all it does is steals from dads and mums like you and me, and it kind of like I look at it and go, actually, it's not really right. And I would never, I mean, when I went to university, everyone was learning to pay their own bills.
Mm.
Yeah, and nowadays people don't learn that, and I think that's a real shame that we're not teaching that to young people when they're at university because as soon as they leave, they've got to work out how to be employed and they got to pay their own bills at the same time. That's like rude. You're just doubling up all the things until they get to the end of university. We never taught you anything at all about how to live, and now we're just going to dump it all on you just when you're most kind of sensitive, having taught you to feel as though feelings are really much more important than fact. For 4 years now, we're going to dump it all on your shoulders. I'm not surprised people are kind of going, "Fuck me, this life is hard."
Yeah, I might go to Vietnam. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah, interesting stuff. It's especially interesting that you essentially built the building out of Meccano. Of course, it wasn't Meccano, but that's what I've got as the image in my mind of small business
Yeah,
steel.
it's basically I called it Meccano a lot.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Impressive stuff. Well, that must have then driven the success of that. Must have driven things forward to want to do for the company to grow and expand. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, a lot of our expansion happened in third parties.
Okay.
But then obviously the London office grew. I think, by the end of it, the London, so we did have, to be fair, three offices. We had an office in London, which did
Mm,
everything to do with development. So it was the biggest one. And then we had an office in Manchester, which was just involved in the investor relations side of things.
sure.
And then Gavin, because he was based in Dublin,
Mm,
because he'd moved back to Dublin,
yeah.
he had a couple of people in the end working for him full time, sort of thing. Whereas there were 4 or 5 of us in the London office at any one time. And it was just, I think, because there were kind of we had to have a few different strings to our bow in the London office because, we were site funding, and that was one job in itself. Then we had to put everything through planning. And then we oversaw the developments and did the development management and that sort of thing, and made sure that they came in on time and on budget. And for the deals that we did, I mean, I have to say, the London office, the people, for me, it's all about, I learned how to invest in the people,
Mm,
kind of thing, make sure that I allowed them to train themselves, to make themselves better, to do what they wanted enough, to go and raise money for charity when they wanted to live their own lives, as well as, and to empower them to learn new things and that sort of thing. And they did amazing work, and had I not chosen such amazing people to work with or to work for me, then I would never have, got anywhere close to the results that we had. And we never missed a planning application. Yeah, every single one we managed to land. Every single building that we completed was completed on time and on budget.
mm,
Yeah, there was one and it was to do with the dispute between us. I think it was more the dispute between us and the development manager that we first ever did a JV with, and they
mm,
weren't then a JV partner. Um, and they missed some things, and I can't kind of quite tell whether they did it in cahoots with the builder, but the builder didn't put the cladding on in the correct manner.
mm,
And as a result, we ended up, while the building was lived in and it was finished, we had to basically have proper security in it while we took some of the cladding off and then did other things to it to make sure that it was, because after Grenfell, it was much more in people's minds.
sure.
And so it's one of those things. It might well have been absolutely fine in any other kind of situation, but just in that moment in time, the rules were being changed a lot, and just wasn't enough record keeping on it. Sort of thing was really a thing, and it took us about 6 months to iron that through. But the building was being lived in, and so it finished on time and it finished on budget. But then we have this thing where we're like, okay, well, we just need to sort that out and make sure it was. And again, from my perspective, it was an amazing learning curve. It was an amazing kind of learning about negotiating with people, negotiating with the contractor who was threatening to make himself go bust so that he could walk away. And, it's like the things you have to kind of, just learn on the hoof. I really loved it, although it's obviously quite stressful because you're going, yeah, but there's students living in the building and they could burn to death and it'd be our fault, and that's not cool, right? So
Yeah, sure.
how do we make it so that we guarantee that, so you've got people living in the building who are up all night in order that they can oversee the staircases and make sure that if there ever is a fire, everyone's out of the building within like 10 minutes rather than everyone still being stoned and down the far end of the corridor going, oh, you might be in, I don't know, go and have a look, which, I mean, I've been a student, so I've been, asleep down the back end of the corridor, I'm sure.
Yeah, right.
It
We've
probably
all been
wasn't in
asleep.
my building, right?
Well, yeah, we've all been asleep down the back end of the wrong corridor. If we've been lucky, if we've been doing it right. Okay, cool. So, uh, moving forward, then prosperity ends, and then you are doing what you come on to, talk a little bit about that. But then also you're now doing, I think I might saying TableNetwork. Do you want to tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about those
Well,
things?
so yeah, can do. So I mean, I think obviously you very graciously skipped over it entirely, and possibly you thought I was avoiding it. I don't, not particularly something I want to talk about, but for anyone on here who kind of knows about it, they'll be quite surprised that we don't cover it. So we ought to. You were slightly involved. I think you lost some money
Sure.
during this, if I'm right in thinking. There were some very lucky people who managed to get out before it all went pear-shaped. But we had an awful lot of investors who, via their Manchester office, had invested in our schemes. Who basically, looked at us and gone, "These guys are really inspirational quite often, and they
Mm,
know what they're doing, and blah blah blah." And we're going to invest our hard-earned money with them. Some of which was secured, and some of which wasn't so secured, sort of
mm,
thing. And there wasn't a, we'd so I think I'd say I wasn't part of that office. The intention from the company's perspective was not to pull over the wool over anyone's eyes.
mm,
Whether there was any wool pulled, I think I think actually someone's in court this week. So whether the HMRC decides there was wool being pulled will be quite clear by the end of it.
sure.
I don't know what day it is. It's not something, but a lot of people at the end of prosperity, a lot of people lost a lot of money. I lost well over £1 million. And I was one of the larger investors, but I wasn't the largest.
Sure.
And in total, there were, well, there was over £20 million that went missing in total, kind of thing, that literally got wiped out. I think there's a small amount of money coming back, but you're talking pennies, in the pound. And it was horrific for many of the investors. It was horrific for myself and Gavin. It was horrific for everyone involved. Very, very stressful. And I think, it took me probably 12 months to stop being in a very dark place, as it were, in terms of I couldn't see the beauty in the leaves in the trees anymore when I went and walked the dog, which is,
Yeah.
I don't suffer from anything like that normally. So that was kind of quite a revelation for me. And I'd spent 2 years prior to that basically trying to talk to investors every week or every other week on Zoom calls, trying to give them an update of what was going on, trying to save the ship, which eventually sank like the Titanic, right? And it was absolutely horrible, and I can only be sorry for how it ended, sort of thing. It wasn't my fault, but it did happen on my watch, so it was equally my fault as anyone else's.
Yeah, understood.
And it
Yeah.
was so yeah, and I'm sorry to you, Tom, because I know that you were involved at the end, and it's like anyway. So one of the things before I actually one of the reasons that Table Network, which is the new venture that I'm running, kind of started was because I was sort of soul searching of something to do, and one of the
Mm,
things that I wrote a business model for that I wanted to do was to kind of do a similar process whereby we housed at-risk women
mm,
and then paid for their social care. But I saw what Rishi Sunak had done during lockdown, where he'd housed all the homeless people in the UK overnight, and then 9 months later, when he thought they weren't scaring us anymore, he shut them back out on the street, even though they had no passing trade, they had no people walking past giving them money, and we'd all learned to shop online, so none of us carry cash anymore. I don't know about you, but I haven't had a pound coin in my pocket unless I was going to the climbing wall where I need one for the locker, you know, for months now. I mean, I can't remember the last time I had money making holes in my trousers. So, so I think that I just kind of looked at that and thought, right, okay, permanent housing. How do we provide permanent housing? And I worked for quite a long time on trying to set up a model that does that. Found that actually the way that and it's obviously much prior to Rishi that but the finances for providing social housing have been strangled over time.
mm.
It meant that if I was going to do it in London, we'd end up providing the people that we housed £56 a month to live on, including paying their bills and their food and everything else. And it was kind of like, okay, you can come and live in one of our places, but take your pick. Which ones you want, heating or food?
Yeah, right.
Right? And
That's not wrong, is
every
it?
single one of them was going to go, well, I'll buy food until I can find good drugs, and then I'll swap it for that because
Yeah.
good drugs will make you less bothered about the fact that you're A, hungry, and B, cold, right? This is
Yeah,
just
right.
won't. So it's like basically we were kind of going have a really nasty life, or you can stay living under the bridge. Well, at least you've got a window, right, and some
Yeah.
sympathy. So
Yeah.
as soon as you move into someone who's taking off the government being held, you turn into someone that everyone hates. And it's like, well, that's not great, is it?
No.
So unless we weren't able to basically help them get their lives back together, and I was like, okay, but that's not the right thing to do then. I could have done it in Manchester, but I've got two kids in school and I'm not taking them out. Well, I did. One of them's in school now. Um, and the other one, incidentally, works as my financial director. So, he's basically my boss, which is really, really interesting and a great, again, got to enjoy the journey, right?
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
it, every minute of it.
Yeah.
And so that's why Table Network has pledged to give 20% of its profits to help homeless people, effectively, because that's what I wanted to do before Table Network was a thing.
Mm.
And I think my reason for Table Network was because of all the, we've talked about some of, I guess, the lessons that I've learned over time, but I've spent a lot of time not knowing what I was doing. And
Mm.
most people who run an SME, okay, small to medium enterprise, they've, I mean, so myself, I went to design school. Yeah, didn't learn any business in design school. I went to art college before that. So I came out basically with dreadlocks, knowing how to roll a joint really well, but not really do much else. Okay. And then I learned to plaster because I'd done a lot of sculpture, and I became a plasterer and I ran a building firm because I was really good at plastering. And if everyone needed the really expensive bit done, like the coving in the Victorian, cornicing or the really intricate woodwork around window frames and that sort of thing, I was the person who could make it look like it was properly original. Yeah. And so in the end, everyone was like, well, the customers always ended up coming to me to ask me to do things, and I ended up running the building firm. Okay. And most people who run SMEs, they just fallen into it in that way. They've just been the person who was good. They've ended up employing other plasterers if they're a plasterers, or other plumbers, getting them work as well if they're a plumber, and they make sure that they don't make any mistakes. And then suddenly they're running a plumbing business. Yeah. And what are you meant to do? Because you've no idea how to do the accounts, right?
Yeah.
And plumbers maybe because at least it's sort of slightly physics based. But there's a whole load of people who run SMEs who didn't come to it because they went to business school. They've got no idea how to run a business, and so for myself, had to spent a lot of time learning about the mathematics behind businesses, and the finance side of things. And I was really rubbish at the beginning, and then now actually when I talk to my accountant, I'm quite good friends with my accountant. And when I talk to my FD, actually, I can understand what they're saying and I can read balance sheets and I can put together spreadsheets. When I first put together a spreadsheet, it was about in 2011. And if it was more than three columns, I kind of fell asleep, right? Whereas now, I mean, we gave away some financial appraisals for property for real estate on Table Network, and they're all things that I designed and that we use during prosperity. And that I know work really really well because I've used them for 50 plus deals that we bought. You know.
Interesting.
Sorry, can you say making sure the new headphone actually works? It just the other one told me it was running out of battery. It's like okay, I have to swap.
Sure.
Um, So, yeah, so I think I've gone through my life sort of looking and going, there's so much stuff I don't know, and I have to go and learn it from here, learn it from here. And then there's when you're looking for the best in class services, you basically have to employ 10 different companies before you find one that actually does a good job and that you get on with,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
so trying to reduce that time and money and mistake is really what Table Network is all about. And I've kind of gone, okay, how can we do that for SME business owners? So not just in real estate. Obviously, my background means that there's quite a few people in real estate on there at the beginning, but we're for any businesses anywhere. Although at the moment we're just in the UK, and we're slowly putting up some education and some that sort of thing, and there'll be a little bit of networking, but it's not about the networking and meeting and greeting people. It's about the saving yourself from trouble. And so one of the things that I did for a long time, which is why I know Proud and Thierry and some others, is we sat around a table once a day once a month for a whole day, and we basically went through all the challenges that we were having and worked out what the solutions were together. So we effectively turned all 10 of us into each other's non-execs for one day a month. And that's better value than you can get from non-execs because the non-execs I've hired, they cost £1,000 a day and they're grey haired and they're old and they don't know what they're talking about anymore because none of their stuff actually, I mean, there's some sage wisdom there, but a lot of it's out of date. And so I say around the tables that we run, I'm the chairperson of the real estate tables because we need one person who's got some sage wisdom, who's done some really bad things and knows how to avoid them. But equally, I learnt my systems in 1990s. Yeah, they're out of date. You really need to be using AI. So the guy who's sitting next to you is far more valuable in terms of recommending systems than me because he's tested them in a business that's just like yours and they really work for him. At which point, go and look at what he's doing, and you go and look at what he's doing in return, and sort of learn from each other. So that's for me the most valuable bit. That's like our premium product, and that really is the difference. You can, I mean, A, it's a 10x on your return, and B, you will grow the valuation of your business much faster than any other way because your best friends becomes your greatest competition or your most inspiring competition become A, your best friends, because once you've sat around a table once a month for each other with each other for 3 years, you are really good friends. You all know each other's families and you've gone skiing together and that sort of thing. You saved each other's lives. And also the amount of respect you've got for each other because you've learned so much from each other is just incredible. So it makes your life better as well. And
Excellent.
that's kind of taking all the bits I've learned from, the good bits of networking and the good bits of board meetings and the good bits of this and that and the other, and kind of saying, okay, we don't want any of the crap, any of the waste of time. We just got the really, really excellent bits, and we're just going to put it into that package.
Makes
Um,
sense.
and the platform online is to have people come along and chat with each other and get a little taster of that. And there's educational stuff you can improve your business and that. And then but if you want to dive further in and then dive further in again, you get more and more and more each time.
Makes
Um,
sense. And you mentioned that you currently lead the sort of real estate tables, which suggests there are tables for people in other industries as well. Is that, or
So
do you
there
think
aren't
something
yet.
coming
So
up?
because we only literally started the company, what, 9 months ago.
Yeah.
But there will increasingly be. We will want. So I mean, my goal is in 5 years we'll have 60 tables, and they'll all be in different industry sectors.
Wow.
So the estate agent one will only have estate agents around it, no letting agents. Yeah. And the one that's for people who run doctors' surgeries will have GPs, people who own GP practices, at it because there's so I think maybe GPs it doesn't quite. So I was speaking to a very good friend of mine who did some landscaping design for us at Prosperity.
Mm.
She runs Alexandra Steed Urban. She's very, very award winning, does some awesome stuff. If you've got multi-million-pound projects, then you need some really good urban landscaping. That's where you want to go. Anyway, I was having a chat with her, and she runs a great landscaping design company. And I said, because we were talking about like the process of table, and I said, well, from my perspective, I want to make sure you're all in competition with each other, but I want to make sure you don't feel like you're in competition with each other. So I never want more than 1% of the industry sector at the same table, at the table. Yeah. So there needs to be 1,000 in competition to make a table of up to 12 people, and
Right.
that's when it works. So I said to her, and she said, "Oh, yeah, well, there are about 500, maybe 700 landscape companies in the UK from micro to maxi sort of thing." And I went, okay, so what do you do that other companies do? She went, oh, well, that would include this. And yeah, then you're up to about 3,000. That works. I'm like, okay, cool. Right. We've got a table for that. And so that's kind of my way of, and we're very careful, we'll take applications probably for each table of 12. We might take 30 applications because we want to curate people who are valuable to each other. There's no point in, okay, so you made the comment about when you went to Canary Wharf Pin, you
Mm.
were a newbie, you were green, yeah,
Yeah.
to the experience. Okay. So if I put you at a table next to the equivalent of Sarge Hussain today, then he would have been bored every time you opened your mouth, right? He would have been sitting there thinking, why am I here?
Yeah.
And yet
Absolutely.
he's the most valuable person in the room.
Yeah.
So I need to put Sarge Hussain around the table with Sarge Hussain,
Mm. Yeah. Right.
yeah, or whoever it is that we're talking about,
Yeah.
but
People at a similar level. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. So we will, of course, as always, put it with the show notes of how people can check out Table Networks and get involved. But people are lazy, so in a word or in a link, how can people check it out? Do you just Google Table Network?
yeah. If you Google Table Network, either as one word or two words, it comes up. It is actually technically one word, Table Network, and tablenetwork.co.uk. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm a relatively chatty person, as you probably gathered by now. Always happy to connect with people, ask questions, give advice. Normally, I charge for that. I work as a business coach and a mentor and that sort of thing at times. And then come and join on our website. There is a link to join the community area. It's going to be for anyone who joins in the next kind of 2 months. It's going to be free until the end of, I think it's March. Maybe it might actually be the end of April. And then it'll be something like £10 a month. But by which time we'll have enough online events and things like that. I want it to always. I want anything that we charge is at least a 10x investment. Otherwise, to you, in terms of what you perceive as value. Otherwise, we're charging too much. So until I think it's worth £100 a month to be a member, we're not going to be charging 10.
There we go.
And that's kind of my rule for any business. And that comes from so I mentioned a Bowie quote earlier. It comes from the album Aladdin Sane, which I have listened to on many occasions and known that one listening was worth the price of the album I paid. And I've done that probably 1,000 times. So I've got 1,000x value on my investment into Aladdin Sane. So there we are. That's how I want to run a business.
The only downside of that does mean I drop my rent, because I think my tenants are getting roughly, say, £1,000 of value. That means I can only charge them £100 a month.
A
Maybe it doesn't
home is
apply
an
to everything.
emotional purchase.
Yeah,
A home is an emotional purchase. That's different.
None of this
But,
constitutes financial advice, whether it's buying Bowie records or whatever else it might be. Mr. Ed Fowkes, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate you taking the time and
Tom,
coming
thank
to
you so much.
speak to us today. And I hope everyone's enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed chatting to you, and all the very best for the future.
Thank you very much, Tom. See you soon.